Well, welcome to the tour. The tour will begin right here, and then what we're going to do is walk up to Brooklyn, to Cesar Chavez. If I keep saying Brooklyn, it's, you know.
No. We remember Boyle Heights in the 50s. I loved walking down Brooklyn Avenue, stopping at the bakery. Hollenbeck Park just brings back so many memories.
I'm Sam Borey. I grew up in Boyle Heights at the corner of 1st and Fresno, 2nd and Fresno Streets, near the Evergreen Cemetery, and I still visit my old neighborhood.
So for some reason, the Heights brings us back. There's a strong pull. The reason that we began here, I don't know, except that it's really one of the landmarks of Boyle Heights. This was the Queen of the Shoals. It originated back in about 1912.
This morning I stopped and I had a couple of tamales. They taste good in East Austin. They taste good.
My father's family came to Boyle Heights and they came down to the Flats in 1920. And my mother's family came from Silver City, New Mexico.
We always loved our neighborhood. And everything that has to do with my neighborhood, I'm there. I have to be there to know what's going on.
When we were young, and so was Boyle Heights, our parents settled in this corner of our world. Beautiful memories were left behind. The 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s are a part of us. Special they were. Name the country, language, or customs, yes. You're looking at us. Did we know or care? All we knew was we were proud of our neighborhood.
Here we go, 1, 2, 3, one more. Looking this way, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
One of my parents was born in Ukraine and one was born in Russia.
My mother was born in Texas and my father was born in Arkansas.
My mother was born in Japan and my father was born in Hawaii.
My father came from Russia, and the name of the town was Pinsk.
My father, Tamarishima from Okayama, and my mother also, Yoshiko from Okayama.
My father came from Spain. My mother came from a little town in Mexico called Sinaloa.
I think one of the first things I was really conscious of was that the diversity of people that lived in the community.
My street was a Caucasian family on the south side, and on the north side was a Mexican family, the Garcias.
Next door to us was a Mexican family. A block away was a Scotch family.
One of my best friends is Toshio Nakajima and Takeshi Akahoshi and Billy Hernandez.
One of my best friends lived across the street. His name was Johnny Ducey, D-U-C-E, like El Duce. And he was Italian. And his mother was a wonderful baker and cook.
Well, Boyle Heights was, like I said, mostly middle class families. Nothing real exclusive. No elaborate homes or anything like that. Just all, working families.
I always thought of it as a middle class neighborhood. I don't know where that came from. Everybody worked. I mean, it was definitely a working class neighborhood.
I don't think I knew one person in Boyle Heights whose parents had been born in the United States. We were all immigrants' kids.
It was really a very large family. You slept in each other's homes. You'd eat at each other's homes. Kids in my block would, their parents would give me tortillas. My mother would give them matzah.
I had no inkling that I was, quote, anything different. I got along with all the kids on the block. I ate Mexican food. I ate cabbages and, whatever.
It was a fellowship. It was, I don't know the term you use, except you became an internationalist, I guess, really, is what you became. Or at least what I became.
I shined shoes in front of the pharmacy on Soto Street. Every business there was Jewish, and they were good people. I like to tell people that they taught me the meaning of the word love, of the word charity.
Well, you know, our parents couldn't live where they wanted to live.
You couldn't buy property.
Every place was restricted.
Yeah.
Asians and African Americans and, you know, Latinos can only live in a certain area, and that's why we all really ended up in the same place, like Boyle Heights, because that was the only place that would accept us.
They had restricted covenants here, you know, and Boyle Heights was open.
Yeah, even in Boyle Heights, you had what they call restricted covenants in certain streets. When some of the African Americans that became a little prosperous and wanted to move in certain areas, they found out they couldn't live there. That's how they found that out, see?
You know, when you're young, there's no discrimination in your mind. Prejudice is put into you by the elders. So, you know, if you had a Mexican living next to you, so what? Then someone puts into your mind that they don't like Mexicans. Well, why don't you like Mexicans? You know, it goes on and on.
The only segregation I saw was when they put in a swimming pool down at the Evergreen Playground, and the blacks weren't allowed to swim in it. And my mother and the African American women, along with the Jewish women, now I can't remember who they are at all, got together and they fought this thing, and they got it, the city had to change their thinking.
Brighton Beach, which is in Terminal Island, was the only beach that the Japanese could go to. They don't let us in Santa Monica or anywhere else.
We used to call that the Japanese Palm Beach. We go there for swimming. Now I look back and said, golly, they didn't let us go here, there. You get angry when you think about it, but at that time, we just stuck to ourselves.
You would talk about the Mexican kids because there were Mexican kids there. You didn't do it in a derogatory sense at all. It was just to describe them, or the Jewish kids, or the Russian kids, or the Italian kids, because you were talking about families who, 99% of them, their parents had just come from the old country, you know, Russia or Italy or Mexico, where they came from. So you described kids that way, you know, hey, let's get the Mexican kids together, let's have a party, or something like that.
The Mexicans used to like to throw rocks. I used to have rock fights with them all the time. They either throw rocks at you when you're walking down the street, or they say, konnichiwa. So I either threw rocks back, or I said, buenos dias. It's really funny. The Mexicans knew all the bad Japanese words, and the Japanese knew all the bad Mexican words. So then when we fought, here would come this one after another, like 10 words in Japanese that are all bad, you know? And then we'd repeat all the Mexican words, 10 words all together that were all bad.
One reason it was hard to get to know the neighbors is because in many of the homes in Boyle Heights, especially in Spanish-speaking community, the kids spoke English, but at the home they spoke Spanish all the time. Spanish was really the first language. Also, it was true among, as I remember, a few of the Japanese friends I had earlier, very few of the parents spoke English. Sometimes the fathers, you could communicate with them, but never the mothers, because they were in the house, I guess, all the time. And the Jewish community, many of us spoke Yiddish because of the grandparents, but they tried to, I think, as I'm talking to my friends now, I think our parents try to have us assimilate as rapidly as possible.
Well, most of the businesses, except for the local stores, the mom and pop stores, was on Brooklyn Avenue.
We had Brooklyn Avenue, which was quite a magnet for Jews from all over the city.
People came together there, came shopping there. Every person came to Brooklyn Avenue and Soda Street. That was the main place to have the business.
On one corner was an ice cream parlor called Curry's Mile High. On the other corner was a drugstore, Carpman's. There were a lot of meat markets, fish markets, one dairy. The guy had a big churn that made butter. Then there were open fruit stands, fruit and vegetables.
It was just like it was yesterday, walking down the stores, smelling the pickles and the Jewish herring, the cream cheese. You could see it.
The entire street, from both sides, was all Jewish merchants, all the way. And then there was Canner's Deli. Canner's Deli was the most famous spot in Boyle Heights. People came from all over to go to Canner's Deli.
Well, we were just all like brothers and sisters, all of us. African Americans and Japanese Americans. Takeo Tanino was a beautiful person, also lived not too far from our house. And he loved the burritos, and he would bring us the steamed rice with the soy sauce. I fell in love with the steamed rice with the soy sauce, you know? You can't have steamed rice without the soy sauce. And we all got along so well.
Roosevelt High was sensational. So Roosevelt was great. It was a great experience. It was an experience of living, you know, with a lot of people, a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, a lot of different religions, and everyone got along pretty well. Just, it was really good, a tremendous composite of America, you might say. Everybody was first-generation Americans.
Do you remember International Days? Did they have some?
Sure, they had. I think they had a picture. I think this is some of it there, where the different nationalities dressed up in the costumes of their native countries, their parents' native countries. Yeah, they used to parade around the field. I didn't get dressed up in anything because we didn't. I didn't know what part of Africa I'd come from.
You know, we had a football team. In 1941, we won the city championship. We had Russians, we had Japanese, we had Jews, we had Mexicans. The team was, you know, composite of really what the high school enrollment was.
Basically, you could divide the sports activity by the race. Like, for instance, in varsity football, most of them were Russian. Vidanoff, Kornoffs, and Semenoffs, and all that. They're huge 200-pounders. In those days, 200 pounds big. B team were all Japanese Americans. And I know one team, as you know, they went through the whole season undefeated. And then came to track. The Mexicans were good in the long distances. Basketball, the Slavics people, the Mandiks and all, they were, in those days, 6'4" was tremendous, you know, and says, oh, Mandik was our center. As I say, just by the sport, you could tell the races that they excelled in.
Now, you see, this fellow was an Italian. Mm-hmm. This fellow was French. This fellow was Jewish. He was Jewish, and this is Galindo. Galindo was Mexican. The guys that I played with, most of them were Mexican. Billy Hernandez and Manuel Madrid. By being in this area, most of these fellows on the team that spoke Spanish, when he wanted me to bunt the ball, the coach would tell me, toca la pelota. And the other team wouldn't know what they was talking about. And he meant bunt the ball, see? So he would tell me just before the pitch, the guy would throw the pitch, he toca la pelota. And I'd get there and say,
walking on Hollywood Boulevard, and the cops stopped us, and they said, "Where are you guys from?" We said, "We're from Boyle Heights." They put us up against the wall, and he frisked us. He said, get back where you come from."
The only time I realized that we had a bad rep was when I joined the UCLA fencing team, and they asked me where I was from. I said, from Boyle Heights, and said, "Aren't you scared living there?" You know, I just, well, why? That's when I figured the image of the Caucasians were Boyle Heights.
People think that that's like the barrio. I mean, it's the ghetto. I mean, they don't see it. They don't even know the community. People outside the community don't know it, and they see it in a certain way.
The most unusual thing about that Buddhist church was every Christmas, the priest would dress up as Santa Claus, pass out present, and at that time we thought it was normal. But now I look back, hey, that's a Christian tradition, and there's a Buddhist minister dressed as Santa Claus. They're very liberal and open-minded.
We had about 8 major synagogues at that time, and you could walk them all the way from City Terrace. You could walk it all the way to Breed Street, which was the main one. On the high holiday services, the kids would all go to the various synagogues, and it became a real social thing. You were dressed in your finery. In Boyle Heights, almost everyone was Orthodox. Those that went to temple. The communists didn't go, and socialists maybe, I'm not sure.
I would say 85% of the population were secular Jews. I hear all this, there was this synagogue, so many synagogues there. I remember 2, 3 is all I remember. You never saw anybody with, yarmulkes. I mean, you just didn't see it. But so it was a secular community. 60-70% of the Jewish population were pretty evenly divided between communists and socialists. And so there were discussions going on all the time.
It was kind of hard times. I can remember where people would come to my mother and maybe get a cup of sugar for some eggs or an egg, things like that. They bartered. I mean, they kind of helped each other out.
I felt we were wealthier than the Mexican kids because, I would go to school with holes in my shoes and I put cardboard inside. But the Mexican kids came barefoot.
My grandfather, I saw him one day, he was in the living room. And the social worker came to talk to him. They want to confirm is he still here or what. And I was hiding in the closet there. And my grandfather was telling her, to the best of his, in Spanish, he was telling her, and I don't know if the lady understood, but he was telling her, he says, I don't want charity. I want to work. And he started to cry. And he raised up his arm and he showed her his muscle. He got a big old muscle here. Look, that's what I want. And he was crying. My grandfather was crying because he was on charity. And I told you he's the one that worked in the copper mines and laying out the ties for the railroad tracks. Deported all these people. I cried because there was a family where we moved, and I told you we moved across the street from my grandparents. It was a duplex. And the family there was Ramirez. They just came and took them from their homes, put a few dollars in their hand, drove them over to the Union Station, and deported them.
One morning, my dad, I was working on his 1937 Plymouth in the garage, and he came over and he said, Kenji, we're at war. Who's at war? He says, Japan and the United States.
I never felt an anger with my friends, my Japanese friends. Never. They were my buddies. I grew up with them until that stupid thing happened, and then they lost everything.
What happened to Frankie Yamamoto? I mean, what happened to him? And then people would say, they went to the concentration camps. And it was sort of a shock.
The Mexican family next door were very sympathetic. And the Caucasian family, a little aloof. They weren't quite sure.
In fact, I think all of us that had friends, they weren't saying, get out, you Japs, and all that. I think the people that didn't know us, and in the media.
When they started taking the Japanese, my father said they should sue them because they are citizens and That is not right. And then they weren't doing anything to the Germans or the Italians, you know.
I remember one of my parents' friends bought a drugstore on First and Soto, which was owned by Japanese people. And I remember my parents angrily telling them how could they have done this to these people, because I'm assuming they bought it for a song because people had just had to leave. And I remember that, and my parents were just furious that they would take advantage of a situation like that. You know, why didn't you rent it from them? I remember that was a discussion. Why didn't you rent it or something like that?
I do know that, like my aunt, she, I think she took over a store there on Fresno for the Japanese people. I don't know the names or anything like that. Well, she had other property for them, and they got it back when they came back.
Boyle Heights always had gangs. The gangs that we had were the Pachuco gangs. During the war, they wore zoot suits.
The first zoot suit I saw were those pants that looked like a Dutch boy pants, and I looked at his pants with the chain hanging down here, and the hat, the feather, and you know how they would walk with a little cocky, hunched, unusual walk, which was not normal, and he was walking down 4th and Chicago, going north to 1st Street, and I saw him, and I said to myself, I said, man, what a clown. How could he dress that way? And he had his hands, and he's turning his chain around. It just was funny to me, but I sure wasn't going to laugh. They walked like with pride to be a Pachuco. They were proud to be a Mexican. They were proud the way they hunched their back to walk. They thought it was the greatest thing.
The servicemen, especially the Marines, took after the zoot suiters. Another time I'm riding on the streetcar, the B car, and a B car goes under a tunnel, and all of a sudden the Marines stopped the streetcar in the front. The streetcar stopped. Marines came aboard, and they went down looking at everybody, and myself included. And they went out, and then they found a couple guys, and they had a fight. They beat the heck out of those guys. They were dressed, you know, Pachuca suits.
And of course, that would really get angered when you get it back to East LA, what happened, and the fighting continued. Just escalated and escalated. And the Navy was just so happy to go and fight. I still don't know what the hell they were fighting about. I mean, we're all Americans.
The real main exodus from Boyle Heights started after, I would say, in 45. And the main brunt of it probably was over by 52.
First, I saw the Jewish people moving out. Most of them went to the either west side or to the valley. And then the Mexicans began to come in, filter in.
We talk about Boyle Heights and the diversity of the community, and it's like if it was such a great neighborhood, if it was so idyllic, why were people leaving?
People just moved out of the neighborhoods as they were able to afford better neighborhoods, or where they would get jobs, they would move closer to where they were.
Most of the people went from Boyle Heights, they went to Fairfax, then they went to the Valley, or they went to Beverly Hills. Okay, so they all sort of matriculated from Boyle Heights.
The impression that I got was the only people that were really kind of content to be in the community or to stay in the community were the Latino people. But everybody else was always talking about getting out.
I used to go to the library on what is now known as Cesar Chavez. That used to be a wonderful place. And then I would cut across and go up past the Jewish synagogue, and those places are still there. It's kind of nostalgic to go by, but it's changed a lot.
There's still kind of remnants of that old community or that original community there, but for the most part, it's completely different. It's completely changed.
The people haven't changed, you know. I think there's more love now than ever. You know, they're at the bottom of the economic ladder that brings people together. It makes you love one another, you know, and there's a lot of love there. There's really a lot of love.
I guess that if I were to sit down and to recapitulate my life and know what are the high points of my life and so forth, I would say Boyle Heights would be right up the top.
And I say this in earnest, that I tell everybody that I come from Boyle Heights, and if the country took after the people living in Boyle Heights, I don't think we'd have the trouble we have today.